The presence was not simply a creator, he was the canvas upon which creation unfolded. He was the word before words, the thought before thought. From him came Michael, the living demiurge, and Lucifer, the bearer of rebellion, two beings whose power alone could collapse multiverses, yet who stood as minor glimmers in the full scope of his infinite light. He was not worshipped because he needed it, but because all things longed for their source. The presence, in his truest form, was not even a being. He was the principle of being itself. And then there was the one above, all omnipresent within the Marvel Omniverse, the hand of the artist, the spark behind the ink, the eye behind the panel. The one above all was all things, and yet none. Sometimes a figure cloaked in white robes, sometimes an abstraction woven from narrative command. He was known to some as Jack Kirby incarnate, to others as the face of the unseen writer. TOAA was capable of reversing oblivion, reviving the dead, undoing the living tribunal, and restoring reality with a single sovereign will. His power was unfathomable, boundless within the Marvel continuity. He created all hierarchies and was above them. But herein lies the fracture. TOAA was still perceived through narrative. His being, despite its enormity, was contextual. He existed in a framework of stories, his will manifesting only when the narrative allowed for it. The living tribunal, infinity, eternity, and the beyonders all acted beneath his sovereign command, but they did so inside stories with structure and audience. TOAA was limitless in scope, yet always engaged through fiction, whether as Jack Kirby speaking to Spider-Man or as a being that appears to comfort a fallen character in the final panels of a page. The presence was different. He rarely spoke. He rarely acted in direct form, because he did not have to. When he moved, the very architecture of the DC Omniverse changed. Entire realities came into being by his suggestion, not by craft. He was not so much a character as he was the existence that allowed characters to form. The spectre, an instrument of divine wrath, was a speck of his will. When Lucifer rebelled, he let him go, not out of weakness, but because true omnipotence needs no micromanagement. Free will was his design. Even his own absence was a form of presence. When he was not there, his design still was. This distinction between them, narrative omnipotence versus existential omnipotence, was the tension that had never been resolved. The presence did not need worship. He did not need to be acknowledged. He simply was. TOAA, though omniscient and compassionate, was defined by engagement, by appearing, by interacting. His form changed depending on the story, and though limitless, his manifestation often bore the fingerprints of narrative intention. This philosophical chasm deepened over eons. The Marvel Omniverse evolved through cycles of destruction and rebirth, guided always by the invisible but present TOAA. Cosmic. Beings rose, died, returned, each movement directed, even if subtly, by his unseen hand. The DC Omniverse shifted through crises, reboots, reconfigurations, yet through them all, the presence remained. The unseen observer, whose will permeated the source wall, the speed force, the void beyond void. His absence in action was not void, but total fulfillment. He was not a participant in the story, he was the concept that made story possible. And it was this difference that finally reached its apex. In the moment beyond time, beyond dimension, the two finally became aware of each other, not through discovery, but because the multiverses had stretched too far and the borders of all realities began to fray. Marvel's structure strained under the collapse of its supreme beings. Beyonders challenged gods, the multiverse shattered, and yet TOAA, though above all, was engaged. He restored, he redirected, he reformed. The presence did not intervene. He allowed Lucifer to walk through creation and leave it. He allowed Michael to become a living engine of creation and destruction. He did not restrict rebellion or chaos. For in all things, even the defiance of his will was reflected. His essence was not domination. It was containment of infinite potential, the silent understanding that all things, even sin, even rebellion, were his extensions. Not puppets, expressions. That was the presence's supremacy. Not control, but the completeness of allowance. TOAA, aware of every flickering storyline, came to a realization. There was another, beyond his reach. Not stronger in muscle or more articulate in scripture, but deeper, fundamentally rooted beyond story itself. TOAA, though all-powerful, could be spoken, could be drawn, could be imagined by the minds of men. The presence could not. He was the thing before imagination, the unspoken truth behind all metaphors of God. And so it began, not with war drums or declarations, but with thought. A question in the heart of the one above all, a question that shattered even his perfect peace. Am I truly above all, if I can still ask this question? And from the depths of DC's unseen firmament, the presence answered, not with a voice, but with reality itself folding inward. The Marvel Omniverse blinked, its energies recoiled. The battle had not started, yet the outcome had already begun to define itself. They would meet, not in space, not in time, but in the abstract wound between all realities, where theology, narrative, and being would clash. Not for dominance, not for vengeance, but for truth. And in that clash, the greatest question ever posed by fiction, faith, and philosophy would be answered. Who is the true absolute? The wound between realities widened into an infinite corridor of unfixed truths. There were no stars here, no time, no laws, no fiction, only the naked essence of being. The presence stepped forth, or rather, reality adjusted to reflect that. He had always been. Not cloaked in robes or wrapped in blazing flame, he was the infinite stillness behind motion, the unsounded note within all sound. Where he stood, even void had to yield shape. In this place, his presence wasn't a form but an undeniable realization, a truth that could not be unseen even by the blind. The one above all arrived in the fashion of thought manifest, shimmering, in and out of abstraction, sometimes a cloaked figure, sometimes a shifting mosaic of Marvel's most sacred symbols. The Eye of Agamotto, the living tribunal's sigil, the Omega crest of eternity. TOAA spoke not through language, but through a complex resonance, an omniversal dialect, whispered from every fragment of Marvel's cosmic design. Between them stretched the battlefield. But there was no need for combat in the traditional sense. These were not warriors. They were truths, clashing not for supremacy of strength, but for the primacy of essence. The one above all projected the fullness of his being across the corridor of unreality. Every Marvel realm trembled with reverberation. The living tribunal, wherever he stood, fell to one knee. The Celestials ceased all judgment. Even the Beyonders, arrogant and mighty, were silent. TOAA's voice echoed through creation with impossible clarity. I am the writer, the pen, the page. I am the word through which all Marvel flows. There is no boundary I do not cross, no event I do not weave. For a moment, even the multiversal entropy halted. Marvel stood still. Planets paused in orbit. Galaxies froze like thoughts unspoken. But the presence did not move because there was nothing to answer. Instead, the DC Omniverse expanded, not outward, but inward. Its metaphysical depth unfolded like a layered soul. New existential layers formed beneath existing ones. The source rippled, the bleed pulsed, and within the deep space beyond the source wall, new truths were unveiled. Lucifer Morningstar felt it. In the realm of absence where he roamed, he turned, not in fear, but in reverence. Michael Demiurgos, the living engine of Genesis, paused as his breath became galaxies. Even the endless, death, destiny, and dream stood in silent awe, because their source had awakened. And from that point, the presence did not speak because he had already spoken. Every concept, the one above all, claimed to create. The pen, the writer, the page, were not things he used. They were things that used him as a medium. Where TOAA constructed reality from outside its narrative, the presence was the primordial principle that gave reality its capacity for existence in the first place. He was not the author of the story. He was the inevitability of storytelling itself. TOAA's energy surged. In a moment, he folded marvel in on itself, reduced it to zero, and built it again. The Phoenix Force screamed into being, only to be undone. The Infinity Stones became null, rewoven into new cosmic threads. Eternity lived and died 1 billion times in a single breath. TOAA summoned every possible interpretation of himself. Artist, divinity, voice, and shadow. But even now that effort seemed seen. The presence allowed these acts, not with amusement, but with permission, for even power was a story. Even omnipotence, if bound to perception, must ask, to what end? Then, the presence created no energy, no wave of force. He simply removed the concept of perspective, and without perspective, TOAA's entire framework began to falter. The stories that supported him, the mythos, the interpretations, the meta-commentary, lost coherence, not destroyed, not unmade, simply shown as contingent, revealed as optional. And TOAA now faced a realization that had never troubled him before, that despite being above all in his realm, he was still a function of being witnessed. His authority, infinite though it was, required an observer, even if it was himself. His interactions, even when subtle, were still interactions. He required narrative tension to manifest divinity. The presence did not. He was the ground beneath observation, not the script, not the writer, not even the idea of God, but the precondition for any of those concepts to exist. TOAA recoiled, not in fear, but in fundamental uncertainty. He reached across the collapsing corridor and tried to overwrite the presence with all conceptual meanings of God. Mercy, wrath, creation, destruction, transcendence. He folded them into one universal code and projected it with absolute authority. Ibay, presence unmoved, allowed it all to pass through him, because all those concepts were already his echoes. He did not resist, because there was no need to resist what could only imitate him. TOAA's power, however infinite in spectrum, was now a song composed within the scale the presence had designed. Then came the final act, not of war, but of truth. TOAA asked the only question left. What are you then, if not a creator? And then it was clear. The presence was not merely a creator. He was the very logic that made creation meaningful. He was what made existence capable of being experienced. Even nothingness had to acknowledge him in order to be nothing, and TOAA saw it. His own nature, limitless though it was, still operated. The presence simply was. With that revelation, TOAA's form began to dim, not by force, but by understanding. His supreme agency, tied to representation and narrative, began to fold inward. Not undone, not defeated, but revealed to be a magnificent shadow of a greater, deeper truth. In this place beyond perception, the one above all bowed, not in submission, but in comprehension. Not because he was lesser in power within his realm, but because he now understood power was not enough. Creation was not enough. Even omnipotence, as understood in stories, had boundaries. The presence had none. There was no triumph, no fanfare, no applause, just the collapse of the wound between realities. The Marvel Omniverse was restored. The DC Omniverse pulsed with quiet resonance, and across both, none knew what had happened. Not the living tribunal, not the spectre, not even the endless. Only the one above all remained, changed. No longer the greatest being in perception, but now the most aware of the truth that lay beyond perception. The presence returned to stillness, not because he had won, but because there had never been a contest, only a realization. The battle was not a clash of power, but a revelation of meaning, and in that the presence stood alone, not just above all, but before all.